Welcome to Storytime. The Beast of Buckingham Palace by David Walliams. Chapter 1. It was noon and the sky was black. There had been darkness over the kingdom for half a century. For many years before, the people of the earth had not taken care of their home. They had burned down all the forests, reducing every last tree to ash. They had pumped down the rivers, lakes and seas full of waste, killing all the fish. They had dug deeper and deeper under the ground for oil, until the planet was hollow to its core. Eventually the earth took its revenge. The ice caps of the Arctic and the Antarctic melted. The floods were so mighty that whole countries became submerged under water. Violent earthquakes shook entire cities to the ground. All that was left were piles and piles of rubble. Volcanoes erupted, pumping billions of tons of ash into the air. Without the sunlight, the crops withered and died. Nothing could grow. The kingdom was plunged into an eternal winter. It was only world Alfred knew. He was already 12 years old, but had never ever seen the sunlight. Often he dreamed how it must have been to feel the sun on your face, or run through a field of tall grass, or swim in a sunlight sea, but it was just that, a dream. The boy had seen pictures of the sun in books and marvelled at it, a perfect circle of gold. Now the moon and stars had become invisible too. Alfred would spend hours and hours imagining how the night sky must have looked with 1,000 lights twinkling through the blackness. He was one of those children who liked nothing more than being alone with his imagination. In truth, he had little choice. Having been sickly his whole life, soon after he was born he became ill. As a baby, Alfred had not been expected to survive, but survive he did, just. The child was as pale as snow and thin as dust. He wore thick glasses to aid his poor eyesight. Often Alfred was so weak he had to stay in bed all day. Thank goodness all around his bed were piles and piles of books. Books, books and more books. Books about animals, books about space, books about trees, books about dinosaurs and books about books. Books about history were absolutely his favourite. The trouble was that there was a strict curfew in the building where Alfred lived. Night was the most dangerous time. That was when there was most chance of an attack from the outside. Lights had to be out at 8 o'clock sharp by order of the king. Anyone caught with lights on would be severely punished. Punishments were brutal in this kingdom. Those in power had returned to medieval forms of torture. Despite the strict rules, the boy loved his books so much that he would carry on reading by candlelight under his covers. The night our story begins, Alfred was doing just that. He was reading a weighty leather-bounded book about the kings and queens of Britain through the ages. The first known one was Alfred the Great. He had become a ruler an impossible long time ago in 1871. The boy was named after the first king, but it was hard to believe anybody could describe this Alfred as great. He felt anything but. As the boy was delving the story of the beheading of King Charles I in 1649, a deafening sound rocked the room. Kaboom! Alfred dropped his book. Thud! And his candle. He very nearly set the covers alight. Woof! Smothering the flames and blowing the candle out. Whoosh! He pulled out his bed covers. Whip! A huge explosion outside had illuminated the boy's bedroom with glowing red, orange and yellow light. Alfred slid out the bed and using all his strength limped over to the huge bay window. Just those few steps left him painfully out of breath. He leaned over the window frame to steady himself. Alfred's bedroom was high up on the top floor. From here he could see far across London. A building was ablaze, but not just any building. St. Paul's Cathedral. This historic structure, perhaps one of the most famous in the world, but had been destroyed. Its huge white dome crackled as if it was nothing more than an egg. Huge plumes of black smoke bellowed high in the air. Oh no, thought Alfred, not St. Paul's. He had seen many London landmarks destroyed over the years. Nelson's column had also been toppled to the ground. Crunch! The London Eye had plunged into the River Thames. Splash! The Royal Albert Hall roof had caved in after a bomb had blasted into it. Boom! However, none of these was as scared as St. Paul's. This was a new low. The cathedral had been built after the Great Fire of London in 1666. The glorious structure had maliciously survived the Blitz, when Nazi bombs rained down on London during World War II. But now it was burning to the ground. Alfred's next thought was revolution. This had all the hallmarks of one of their attacks. The boy had never met anyone from this top-secret organization before, but the Lord Protector had taught him more about them. From what Alfred had been told, the revolutionaries hated the fact that power had returned to the king. They wanted to overthrow him and behead him, just like the Roundheads had done to Charles I during the English Civil War. The revolutionaries stood only for death and destruction. That is where the Lord Protector said they needed to be crushed at all costs. Rat-a-tat-tat! There was a burst of machine gun fire. No! The distant sound of shouts. Ah! Was that a scream? Alfred shivered. As much as he wanted to look away, he couldn't. Every day there was attacks all over London, but explosions on this scale was rare. The boy pressed his hands up against the cold, thick glass and looked out at the devastation. This was the kingdom Alfred would one day inherit.